as a member of Beacon, as an occasional worship associate, which is a job I like, because it sort of feels like you're the co-pilot of the plane, that you don't have to fly the plane. So about a month ago, Reverend Robin sent a mail to me and a few other people with a question. He says, hey, how would any of you like to lead a service in the month of July? That email created two very strong, sort of almost emotional responses in me. Part of it was like, oh wow, I would love to do this. The other part was almost the opposite and almost equally strong, like, oh my, this is petrifying, I would never want to do this. And I was really struggling how to answer this email with these two emotions in me. When I looked at the calendar with a sigh of relief, noticing that I was going to be not just out of town, but out of the country the whole month of July. So I said, well, dear Robin, I would love to do this. Alas, I'm out of the country. And I forgot about the episode. Then a few weeks ago, on a weekday, I was here setting up for the divorce support group. And often Robin and I exchange a few pleasantries, and often she sort of, in the most casual way, comes to me and says like, Wim, hey Wim, would you mind doing a few little things? You know, you live close, you have a key, would you mind opening the doors, checking on the coffee, make sure the oven is off? Those are like little things that I sometimes do, which I'm quite qualified for. And in that tone of voice, she's like, hey, you're around on the 30th. And I'm like, yeah, sure. I'm like, what do you need? She's like, oh, why don't you lead the service that day? So I'm like, sure. And she's like, what am I supposed to do? She's like, yeah, do something with identity, I'll be fine. So the other half of me was sort of freaking out a little bit. Google identity, what do I do? I actually spoke to several of you, sort of trying to put this together, and it was actually my beautiful life partner, Diana, who gave me the idea. It's like, well, why don't you do something with the dynamic between individual identity, which we've been exploring the last few weeks, and the identity of a group. Okay, so I sort of went with that and did some research on it. Some very rich topics, a lot of very, very deep, important questions that I encountered, and I have to give you a warning, I didn't really find any answers, but they're very interesting questions to ponder, because we're all individuals. I'm an individual right here. I'm an individual interacting with Robin in this little exchange, where she represents the group of Beacon, even though in this exchange I'm sort of maybe two identities almost interacting with Robin. But we are here together. We are a group, and we do form a community. So let's explore this a little bit, and let's start with individual identity, which we've talked about in the last few weeks, and it connects directly to one of our principles. Actually, the first principle, inherent worth and dignity of every person. But think about that for a moment. Think about the question, who am I? Emily, a few weeks ago in a sermon, talked about this mantra almost, that when I am who I am, who I am. I often find myself repeating that, who I am, who I am, who I am, many, many times, just realizing that as an individual you have this unique experiencing of observing the world with your sense of being from your own body. That is an absolutely unique perspective, and I find it sometimes hard to sort of see where you end up, but if you really think hard, you end up sort of in the same place that well-known French philosopher and mathematician René Descartes wrote down in the 17th century, when he said, and he wrote it in Latin, a beautiful phrase, he said, cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. It's sort of the very core of the identity. The one thing we're sure of that we're not really sure. Now, let me ask a little help from each of you. You guys are ready to help a little bit? Yeah? We can do this together? If you were to ask the question, who am I? And I would ask you to answer it with one word. Think about it. What word would you come up with where you say, who am I? All right, you can use 2 words if you want. 3. Any of you have an answer? Any of you? Yeah? Does this feel like something you can answer? Any of you brave enough to shout out your 1 word, 2 word answer? Anybody feel like doing it?
Father.
Father.
Human.
Alive.
Human. Alive.
Survivor.
Survivor.
Echo.
Say again?
Echo.
Echo. Okay.
Someone said teacher.
Teacher. Okay. So, we are good at this. Thank you. I did it myself as well, and I said, well, I'm Wim, I'm a father, I'm a worker, I'm an American, I'm a Belgian, I'm a human, I'm a Unitarian. Those are sort of words that came to me. Now, it's fascinating if we do this exercise that many of the words we can come up with are words that immediately imply some type of relationship. You can't be a father unless there's a child. You can't be a son unless there's a father. You can't be a worker unless you have college. You can't be a citizen unless there's a country. There is a larger group and community around us that helps us define our identity. And it brings us to our second principle: justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. Because we do relate in our identity with many people around us. Because as a species, humans are fundamentally social animals. It is sort of part of our DNA. It's sort of who we are. And actually there is a British anthropologist, Robin Dunbar, who did some work on this in the 90s and really tried to understand social behavior of mammals as they are part of the evolutionary chain. And he found a very strong correlation between sort of the size of the frontal cortex of a brain of a species and their ability to form social groups, or the average size of their social group. And no surprise, humans as sort of the most evolved species with the biggest frontal cortex, we form the biggest social groups. And Dunbar actually calculated that for humans, they have sort of an inherent ability to build meaningful relationships with, on average, about 150 people. Some people are more, some people are less, but that's sort of where we average out. And that number is now known as the Dunbar number. And there's Dunbar number for other species. And so I know some of you may say, but I have many more friends than that on Facebook. But remember, Dunbar said meaningful relationships. So we are social, we are individuals. And not only are we social, we almost drive everybody else to be social. Sort of from the smallest age in school, in kindergarten, kids are sort of educated, like, hey, you should work together. You should do this in a group. You should form a group even at the youngest age. We constantly get almost pressure to be even more social. You know, when we join a sport or a team, it's like it's all about the team. You know? Sometimes we are in workplaces or we see motivational posters that say, there is no I in team. There is no I in team. And so it becomes part of our culture. We almost put groups on a pedestal. The one that I personally resonate with is the group of our country. We all belong to this country. That's going to have a birthday very, very soon. And our founding fathers, who we put on a pedestal, wrote that Declaration of Independence. And what I recently learned, I went to a play in New York about the Constitution, and I learned that only a few weeks before the Declaration was written, the original draft said, "We the people of Delaware, New Hampshire, Maryland," and so on. It didn't say, "We the people of the United States." They changed that a few weeks later. And they came up with, again, an absolutely beautiful phrase to sort of define our country, that in Latin reads, "E pluribus unum." You know, we see it on coins and many places. Out of many, one. It's really powerful. It sort of defines who we are as a culture, as a country, as a pedestal of virtue. Now, sometimes I wonder when we do the out of many one, okay, that looks quite powerful, okay, it's a country. What happens to the many? Where do they go? Are they sort of gone? So like you make a soup and they're gone? Or where, at what point do we sort of lose our own identity and sort of subsume the identity of a group, which I think we all know examples in our lives where we've seen that happening, either in ourselves or in other people. We can lose ourselves in a group, in a club, in a relationship, in a country, in a political movement, you name it. And we've observed, and I'm sure all of you have seen this as well, that when groups behave, they don't always behave very nice.
Mm-hmm.
Groups, think of, fans of sports teams, the more people in a group, sometimes the sillier they behave.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes the dumber they behave.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes they are really stupid.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes they are mean. And sometimes they can do atrocities. Just think about the history of warfare and oppression, of people groups doing the most unspeakable things to each other because, well, that's what everybody else did. It's sort of what we were supposed to do. So this group dynamic can really lead us down the wrong path when the many are gone and the one isn't doing the right thing. So what do we do? How do we deal with this? Again, I don't really have the answer, but we have obviously the option for many groups. So, well, I don't like this group. This is not me. I'm just going to leave the group. Some groups you can leave relatively easily. But sometimes by leaving a group, you sort of join the complement of that group and you become part of the group of everybody who left that first group. And it doesn't really solve because now you're part of another group. If you're not this, then you're that. So it's not so easy to figure out what to do with it. And some groups, like a country or a race or a species, we can't really leave. You're part of the group, whether you like it or not. And we do make mistakes. You know, we do fall, and I find myself often in this case to fall in this trap of the echo chamber or the group think where it feels right because everybody else says it's okay. And as I was thinking about this, there was one thing that I realized, that when there's pressure between an individual and a group, the group has an identity, the group has rules, the group has laws, has covenants, has principles, has governance, and it behaves almost like a person. It might even have an image or a logo or an emblem, and it assumes an identity, and identities can clash. But what I realized that I found very helpful is that groups can do a lot of things that individual or identities do. But what groups don't really do, if you think about it, they don't really communicate. You may say, wait a minute, groups communicate. I just got an email from Beacon. It's a group communication. Well, yeah, but let's think about it. Who sent that email? Who wrote that email? Probably is a staff member or minister who wrote the email and sent the email to all of us, assuming the identity of the group. But it is still, at the end of the day, a particular individual who communicates. And we see lots of examples of this. You know, we see a policeman telling us, you're not allowed to park here. Well, there's a rule of a community and law that says what you can and cannot do, but it's ultimately an individual using the authority of the group to communicate to the rest of us. And we do this all the time. Sometimes you join a new company and you're like, oh no, that's not how we do things around here. Somebody communicates on behalf of the group. Sometimes we get ready to go to church and somebody says like, oh, I wouldn't wear that to church. We do that, I do that. And that's again, we sort of assume the identity of the church. So let's bring this home a little bit further. We are a group, Beacon, we are a group. We have principles, you said. We like to claim, as I said earlier today, we are radically inclusive. We say that. No? Okay, we're radically inclusive. Are we? You might want to ask ourselves, if we are so radically inclusive, look around. Why are we not more diverse? You know? And I often wonder that, and actually I have had friends of mine who have attended Beacon, didn't come back. They felt a little bit like, where is it, that little pink ducky. They felt a little bit like, in the beautiful poem that Jacqueline wrote, they felt like the weed and not like the flower. And I wonder sometimes, and I've talked to some of you about this, what would happen one day if one morning, right before service, through these doors, somebody walks in with a hat or a sign of a group that is maybe a hate group, or a white supremacist group, or a political movement whose values clearly, directly conflict in everything we believe in. Can happen. What would we do? Part of me would want to punch them in the face, I'll be honest. Would we want to be radically inclusive? Would we want to say, good morning, thank you for coming. We are glad you could join us. And that is the struggle. That is the struggle where an individual communicates to another individual on behalf of the group. And one thing as doing the work for this that I've become so much more cognizant of, and I would ask of each of you to sort of try the same thing, is that in our communications every day, when we communicate or being communicated to, at what point are we the individual? At what point are we the group? And maybe we can take this a step further. Maybe it's just not the dynamic between two individuals, one pretending to be the group. Maybe the real struggle and the real dynamic is between the individual itself, between the individual's own identity and the identity of the group that they're part of and are communicating on behalf. And it brings us back to the very beginning, when we and Descartes were thinking, I am who I am, who I am. And how do we deal with this tension between the individual and the group? Maybe there is no answer to this struggle. Or maybe, just maybe, the struggle is the answer. Maybe what defines us is this struggle in every day between who we are and the group that we belong to. Maybe an individual doesn't really exist without having other human relationships. And maybe groups don't exist without individuals. Maybe we need that struggle to be who we are. Final point. There's also, let's think about large groups. Yeah? Think about our seventh principle. The interdependent web of all beings. It is the one group that everybody is meant for, that you cannot check out on. It is the biggest group out there that we're all part of. Now, who communicates on behalf of that group? Is there some big creator who has a bullhorn? Is there some spirit of life? Or just maybe, when we listen, when we close our eyes and we hear all the noise disappear, we can find, not up there, far away, but in here, deep down, a little piece of that spirit of life that can help us and guide us to be ourselves in the groups that we belong to. Thank you.
Amen.